Some jokes are meant to get a laugh. Some jokes pass and are forgotten the moment the applause fades. And then there are jokes that open doors that were never meant to be opened, doors to memories so private, so heavy that once they swing open, nothing is ever quite the same again. On November 14th, 1985, one harmless joke did exactly that. It cracked open a secret that Clint Eastwood had carried in silence for 15 years, a secret tied to a promise tied to a dying father, and a moment so raw that even the king of late-night television was left speechless. That night, America didn't just see a movie star do something unexpected. America saw a man lay down his armor. The NBC studios in Burbank, California were buzzing with the familiar energy of a Tonight Show taping. Studio lights glowed. Cameras rolled. The band warmed up. 465 audience members filled their seats, most of them thrilled just to be inside a room where television history had been made for decades. Nobody came expecting tears. Johnny Carson had been behind that desk for 23 years. Presidents had sat across from him. Icons, legends, people who controlled every word, every expression. Johnny had seen nerves, arrogance, charm, and ego. He thought he understood how this worked. That night he was wrong. When Clint Eastwood stepped out from behind the rainbow curtain, the audience erupted. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way he always did. 6'4", broad shoulders, a face carved from years of squinting into desert suns and staring down villains. He wasn't just an actor, he was an image. Strength, control, silence. This was the man who made entire theaters go quiet without saying a word. What most people watching didn't know was that Clint and Johnny weren't just host and guest. They were friends. For nearly 20 years. Golf games in Malibu. Long dinners away from cameras. Conversations that never made it to air. The interview began exactly as expected. Clint was there to promote his new film, Pale Rider. Stories flowed easily. The audience laughed at Clint's dry humor. Everything felt safe, familiar, comfortable. 15 minutes in, Johnny leaned forward with that familiar glint in his eye. The look that said a joke was coming. "You know, Clint," Johnny said, smiling, "you've always been known as the strong, silent type." The audience chuckled. Johnny continued, referencing the roles that had made Clint legendary. The Man with No Name, Dirty Harry, cowboys who spoke more with their stare than their mouths. Then Johnny paused. "I've heard some interesting rumors over the years," he said casually. "Hidden talents. Things you don't talk about." Clint raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Johnny gestured toward the grand piano sitting near the bandstand. "I heard you actually play piano. Is that true? Or is that just Hollywood nonsense?" The audience laughed louder now. The idea was absurd. Dirty Harry at a piano. The man who'd gunned down hundreds of bad guys on screen, gently pressing ivory keys. Johnny pressed on, enjoying the moment. "Come on," he said. "You've handled every weapon known to man in your movies. Surely you can handle a piano." Ed McMahon's laughter echoed through the studio. But Clint wasn't laughing. He sat very still in the guest chair. His expression didn't change much, but Johnny noticed. After decades of reading people, he felt it instantly. The energy had shifted. Clint looked down at his hands. Large hands, steady hands, hands that had built a legend, hands that now hesitated. The laughter began to fade. 3 seconds past 0.5 seconds. On television, silence is deafening. Johnny started to backpedal. "Hey, I'm just kidding around, Clint. You don't have to." "Actually, Johnny," Clint said quietly. There was something in his voice. Something heavy. "I think I will." Johnny blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" Clint stood up. The audience murmured, confused. He walked toward the piano, his boots echoing softly against the stage floor. Each step felt deliberate, weighted, as if he were walking toward something he'd been avoiding for years. He sat down at the bench. His hands hovered above the keys. The studio went completely silent. The band lowered their instruments. Ed McMahon's grin faded. Camera operators exchanged glances. Johnny stepped out from behind his desk, instinct screaming that something important was unfolding. And then, for the first time in his career, America saw something it had never seen in Clint Eastwood's eyes. Vulnerability, What happened next cannot be understood without going back, far back, to a childhood shaped by instability and quiet sacrifice. Clint Eastwood Jr. was born in 1930 during the Great Depression. Stability was a luxury his family never had. His father chased work wherever he could find it: steel mills, gas stations, sales jobs, anything to keep food on the table. They moved constantly. Oakland, Sacramento, Spokane, town after town, house after house. By the time Clint was 15, he had lived in more places than most people ever would. Money was always tight. Dreams were a luxury. But Clint's father carried one dream quietly inside him: music. Before the Depression crushed so many ambitions, Clint Eastwood Sr. had been a gifted pianist. Jazz standards, classical pieces, melodies that lingered long after the final note. People who heard him said he could have done something with it. Life had other plans. The piano became something he touched only in stolen moments. Late at night, after work, when the house was quiet and the world wasn't asking anything of him, young Clint would hear it through thin walls, soft notes drifting through rented homes. He would sneak out of bed and sit on the stairs, listening. His father never knew. Those moments became some of Clint's most treasured memories. Music wasn't just sound, it was peace. It was the only time he heard his father rest. As Clint grew older and started dreaming of Hollywood, his father never discouraged him. When rejection letters piled up, when people said acting was foolish, his father stood firm. "You've got something special," he'd say. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Years passed. Clint found success. Fame followed. Roles multiplied. The promise of music faded into the background of a life moving at full speed. Then one evening in 1965, Clint sat with his father on a back porch in Northern California. His father's health was beginning to decline. The sun dipped low. The air felt heavy. "Can I ask you something?" his father said. "Anything, Dad." One day, he said quietly, "When a movie slowed down, will you learn to play piano?" Clint smiled. "Sure, Dad. One day." It was the kind of promise sons make easily, without understanding how much weight it carries. 5 years later, Clint got the phone call. His father had suffered a massive heart attack. He dropped everything and flew to Los Angeles. When he walked into the hospital room, the man who had survived the Depression, who had worked every job imaginable, looked small, fragile. Clint stayed by his side for 3 days. On the second night, when it was just the two of them, his father squeezed his hand. "Do you remember what you promised me?" The memory hit Clint like a freight train. His father smiled weakly. "It's okay, son. You've done enough." But it wasn't okay. That night, Clint made calls. He found a piano, had it brought into a private room at the hospital. Nurses thought he was crazy. He didn't care. For 48 hours, Clint practiced, fingers aching, back hunched, playing not for perfection, but for love. On February 22nd, the doctor said his father was awake. One final lucid window. Clint had the piano wheeled into the room. When his father saw it, his eyes widened. "Just listen, Dad," Clint said. His hands trembled as he played Misty, his father's favorite song. The notes weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. His father cried. "You remembered," he whispered. 2 days later, he was gone. Clint never played that song again. Not until Johnny Carson made a joke. Back on that stage, Clint's fingers touched the keys. The first notes of Misty filled the studio, but this wasn't a performance. It was a conversation with someone who wasn't there anymore. Johnny stood frozen. Tears streamed down his face. The audience didn't move. When the final note faded, silence held the room. Then a standing ovation. Not applause, gratitude. Johnny approached the piano, voice breaking. "I had no idea," he said. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Some things aren't meant to be told," Clint said. "They're meant to be kept." That moment changed everything. Donations poured in. A music fund was created. Thousands of children received instruments. A private promise became a public legacy. And every year alone, Clint still sits at a piano and plays Misty. Because some promises aren't meant to be kept once. They're meant to be kept forever.